Our next artist to speak is Michael Vasquez. And Michael was born in St. Petersburg, Florida, and now lives in Miami. He received a BFA in 2005 from the New World School of the Arts. Right. His work has been featured in exhibitions to include Lehman Maupin Gallery in New York City, the Museum of Contemporary Art in Miami, the Kemper Museum of Contemporary Art in Kansas City, Missouri, the Mobile Museum of Art in Mobile, Alabama, and his work currently appears in a group show titled New Work Miami 2010 at the Miami Art Museum in Miami, Florida. Michael's represented by the Frederick Snitzer Gallery in Miami, and it's a real great pleasure to bring him up here tonight. Michael?
Thank you. Happy to see such a large group here tonight for this. Ruth, thank you for everything you've done. My mother, who's actually joining us here in the back. Thank you for her. For me. And of course to the school, it's certainly an honor to be here. And I think it's both enriching for the students and us as artists as well. This is a great opportunity for us. Even preparing for this has, for me anyway, allowed me to figure out a lot about what it is that I've done, and in turn where I want to go. As Ruth said, I was born in St. Petersburg, Florida. I moved to Miami, earned my bachelor's degree in 2005, and I've been making art ever since. I think it's best to just jump right in and talk about the work as we view it. So let's do it. This is an early work I made while still a student in school. I think it's a good one to start with because it sort of sets the tone for all of my work, actually. In that I grew up an only child of a single parent mother and didn't have brothers or sisters to play with. Excuse me. This is called The Completed Family Portrait, in which I took an old photograph of my mother and I, which would be our family portrait, and appropriated it to include missing family members that are represented by characters from the Dick and Jane series, which, if you're not familiar, is the idealized American family from the 1950s. My mother learned to read from Dick and Jane books. I'm sure many in the audience are very familiar as well. So again, these kind of generic characters to fill this void. Again, being an only child, not having brothers or sisters to play with, and dealing with that at an early age, not really being allowed to go out and play in the neighborhood. You find ways to entertain yourself. I think that this piece is pretty important in that, number one, it was one of the first works I showed, or I had shown professionally, and also the computer, I think, really sets a time period for my work, in that I believe that the issues that I try to address are very contemporary and of the now, and I think the computer is a good link to that. Again, a lot of exploration of the mother and son relationship that we had, which we were obviously very close. My mother worked very hard, obviously, to support me by herself, and after after work, you know, no one wants to cook for one person and a little kid. So this is sort of symbolizing that experience. This is called the weighted trash chore, and again, taking out the trash is this kind of a masculine household responsibility that I wanted to represent. You know, the idea of being the man of the house, and the trash actually being a metaphor for the problems that were being dealt with, and trying to rid myself of that. You can also notice some elements in the background that you'll see reoccurring throughout this presentation. The fence and the house, the fence representing some sort of obstacle, and the home, or I'm sorry, the structure representing a home, and therefore alluding to ideas of family. Again, sort of shared feelings of bitterness with my mother towards my father, who again is represented here by the father from Dick and Jane, really generic, playful, something about a certain level of innocence. So that's, in theory, my mother and I teaming up to get back at my father. This piece is called Fishing with Father, and if you notice, there's no father there. About, you know, unfulfilled promises, and you know, making plans to do something with your father, and because I would see my father on occasion, you know, once a month I would go visit him, but a lot of times that wasn't very exciting, and if we did in fact plan something that was more exciting, it often didn't work out. So you can see this kid fishing alone. Again, notice the fence in the background, and even the seawall, which also represents some sort of obstacle or barrier. And the whole idea of fishing, and, you know, fishing, searching for something. This is actually the second part to that piece. It's not exactly a diptych, but it's two related works. You can see he's frustrated at his father not showing up, and taking out his aggravations by skipping stones, again, over that obstacle represented by the seawall. This is actually a sculpture made of Lego. It's called A Father That's Always There. It's generic life size for a male, which would be about 6 feet. Faceless to a certain extent, and again modeled after the father from Dick and Jane. You know, about the idea of a child playing with Legos, and the innocence involved with that. And of course, Lego providing the opportunity for this kid to build whatever he wants, and he chooses to build a father that will always be there for him. This next shot is actually an installation shot of my first exhibition, solo exhibition at the gallery. You can see the placement. He's actually overlooking the fishing trip. You know, he's there now. Again, notice the fence in the background, which basically split the gallery in two. It was a really beat up fence that we found, and the back of the gallery contained works that were more innocent, similar to the ones that we've already seen, and I whitewashed that side of the fence, while the other side that we cannot see was left raw, and that section of the gallery contains some of the more tough and aggressive works that we're going to see soon. So again, this idea of a kid venturing out in search of something, into the darkness, into the unknown, the fence representing this obstacle, and the kid assembling these blocks a la Lego to get over this obstacle. This is called the Neighborhood Tour, and you can see again, a lot of the times I exaggerate the youthfulness in the kid just to communicate the idea of these people being slightly older than me or this kid, and him looking up to these people. So again, the idea of the unknown and being taken out on this tour of the neighborhood, the gesture certainly evokes a sense of security through it all. This show is actually this piece is actually in the show. I think the things I wanted to say about this perspective, you notice that again it's more or less exaggerated, but you can tell that the perspective is from a low point. Again, trying to communicate the idea of a child, maybe not such a child, but early teen, preteen, being exposed to these foreign gestures and hand signs and signals, and ways of carrying oneself, and also recognizing a certain level of emulation between these people, banding together to identify themselves. It's called How to Stand for Something. Again, the idea of emulation to the point of actual mirrored image of these two older figures here. Their knees come together to create this throne that the kid is allowed to sit on for a brief period of time. You can see together their hands, they create a crowned heart, 5 points on the crown. There's certain connection, numerical connections between gangs and numbers, obviously, but whether that be crowns or stars, the amount of points sometimes signifies the gang. And then again, this throne being this kind of artificial thing that's created and that only exists and is only strong when these two parts are together. It's called the acceptance. Again, the perspective on it, set kind of low. Sort of this two-way street of one being accepted into a gang versus accepting the bandana. Are they accepting you or are you accepting them? The bandana embodies the gang and symbolizes the gang. And there are elements in the background that reinforce ideas about what the gang may stand for. Certain things that evoke ideas of masculinity, such as the weights here in the background, lawnmower, even a safe. All these are important symbols. Again, like allusions to things being artificial. This is a painting of this kid getting a marker tattoo of, again, a crown, 5-pointed crown heart. These next works are some of the first portraits that I ever did. They weren't very large. They were 3 feet by 2 feet. Some collage elements there in the background. Initially, I made these to try to pay tribute to the people that I looked up to growing up. Again, ideas of superficialness and artificiality, collage aspects being the bandana and the money, kind of imposed onto this young man. A little less collage work there in the background, starting to move away from it and trying to mimic the same sort of effect through paint alone. This is actually the first large-scale portrait that I did, 8 feet by 6 feet. There's one in the gallery that's of similar scale, 2 actually. Again, the idea of paying a tribute to somebody that I looked up to, this time a grander tribute, and actually forcing the viewer to look up to these people just as I had. Really letting the red paint take over and overpower these paintings. You can see the introduction of different kinds of mark making and actually throwing paint up there. Some of that white paint is thrown on top to try to capture this aggressiveness. And then I thought maybe it would be a good idea if I'm going to be talking about gangs and or just the relationship of people in general, to do some group portraiture and show the way that these people interact and emulate each other. Sometimes it's good to switch the palette up, get away from so much red, staring at 8-foot red canvases all day. And then I started thinking about, okay, well, if I'm gonna do, or if I'm gonna make works about the relationship between these people, who's included into the group portrait, I thought about the process of exclusion being equally as important as who's included, who's excluded. So you can see different levels of exclusion here. One guy in the back is kind of there, another guy totally cut out of the picture. Back to single portraits. This work's in the show. The more I thought about it, I decided that maybe it would be better to include the backgrounds in these works and set these people in reality. Oftentimes, I would place them in front of a doorway, sort of alluding to this idea of protecting something or blocking the viewer from something, excluding the viewer. And then, of course, you know, the idea of a home structure, being a home, evokes ideas about family, which are all things that are important to me. This work you guys are obviously familiar with. Further exploring the relationship between the models and the background. Trying to relate the two, finding relations between the background and the figures. You can see like the icicle Christmas lights really relating to the way that this guy's hair falls down, or the wrought iron work relating to this guy's hair. This energy that happens with the mark making that identifies the connection between the two. And again, this idea of sticking together to protect something. Basically saying you're not allowed. And then further exploring like locations around the home, like the garage, which I think carries a lot of ideas of masculinity with it. And these places becoming the learning grounds of certain ways, rules and regulations, such as in this case, what to drink, what kind of cigarettes get smoked, Marlboro Reds and Hennessy in this case, which both are very tough and masculine things. Notice the figure's propped on a stool there again. We're looking up to this guy. More findings in a friend's dad's garage. This is a skeleton of a dead rat. An allegory, dark symbol, sort of a warning about, you know, don't talk about this kind of thing, or this is private, inclusion, exclusion. More adventures in the garage, you know, maybe skip school a couple times, watching Tupac videos in a friend's dad's garage, spending the day like that with the desire to emulate Tupac and his presence and the way that he carried himself. He was obviously very important for my generation. The backyard, the fence, property line, definition of territory, all these things are important to me. You can see what this guy's doing here. He's underscoring that property line and marking that territory. And a lot of the marks on the fence have a relationship to graffiti, which again has a lot to do with territorial boundaries and defining that. This is a triptych called The Lay of the Land. It's about 6 feet by 12.5 feet. Again, you can see a section of a neighborhood here that was largely populated by this group. They controlled it, and you can see these guys standing on both ends, almost like an open gate, letting the viewer in, but at the same time, sort of intimidating them. You know, ideas about territory, protection. Houses that are highlighted with red were houses that had some sort of affiliation. Again, inside a home in that neighborhood, actually, where the homeowner had red carpet. You know, the idea of these things totally taking over your life, affecting, in this case, what color carpet you choose to have installed in your home. And you can see this young man, he's moving into this house, and he's dealing with it. On one side, there's sort of a sense of pride, and on the other, it's almost like a burden on his shoulders, literally, signified through the bandana. This is called the Red Wardrobe. This is 9 feet by 12 feet. Again, this red just taking over one's life. Strictly red clothes. Ultimately to the point of being consumed by this thing. It's called Hiding Behind the Gang. You can see the placement of the hand gesture cast a shadow over his face, concealing his identity. Ultimately, trying to communicate that idea of being consumed by this thing, losing your own identity almost. And also here, you can see this young man here on the right, being controlled and manipulated, suggested through the pulling of his necklaces, which seems to strangle him to a certain extent. This is called the chain strangle. Again, you can see symbols there. There's a 5-point crown there, if you notice, on one of those chains. And again, he looks all right with it, but again, they're pulling on his neck. So it's kind of this unclear path that, you know, one may end up in. Again, the fence in the background. And as we were watching the young child try to make his way onto the other side of the fence, now that we're here on that side, maybe things aren't as great as they were. And if you notice, on the other side of the fence now, the sky is blue and the trees and grass are green. Sort of like signifying that the grass isn't always greener on the other side, this side being the other side. And then I have, these are some works in progress, just collage works that I've been working on, really experimental, just taking multiple images from the same scene, painting them, cutting them up, taping them together. Different scenes, cut up, taped together. This is actually a very early work that I thought was connected to some of the work that I'm working on now. You can see the collaged aspects there. And this is a large painting that I'm currently working on, where the photo that I'm referencing is actually multiple photos collaged together that I'm then painting from. You can see all the fences here again, and there actually being holes in these fences, sort of talking about things not being as secure as you may think they are. Well, that's it. Thank you very much.